Goodness me, we are 4 minutes ahead of schedule. Let us enjoy this special moment. So it turns out all along that the secret is not to do with technology and change. The secret is to do with good old advanced communication skills and conveying your intellectual property and expertise in the new environment, in new ways. And you are consumers. You know how quickly you can read things. Newspapers have used for years the F reading pattern. They have a headline, they have everything in the first sentence because they know hardly anyone reads the rest of that column. And so what we are doing here is just drawing attention to how we might need to sharpen our skills and use them and to take advantage of and really enjoy this new environment and be brave with making sure that we are communicating with our learners as well as possible. So these are the 3 topics. We've heard from Xenophon about his experience of getting something online to a short deadline. We've just heard from Loreto about, and had an opportunity to sharpen some of our ways of writing in new environments. And my last section is about how to communicate using audio, using the voice. And I have some materials that I created for an online medical education course where I have recorded some explanations, some things I needed to say to my learners when I wasn't there, to illustrate how using technology that you are already familiar with, how you can adapt and develop skills in this new environment. So you already give explanations day in, day out. You explain to researchers the cutting edge of your practice. You explain to patients things you want them to do and everything in between. And so we are now going to look at communicating through explanation. So the first, my objectives. So I want to share with you and identify a structured approach which will make sure that when you are giving these spoken explanations, you are doing so in a way that means we're all likely to be adopting a high quality structured approach. So I don't just mean you just chat. I mean we give well-structured explanations to people. And so let's explore that. We are working on some guidelines for people to try and adopt a similar structure, just in the same way as whenever I design some teaching, I have objectives, and I do that to show that it is structured and planned, even if during the session it seems as though it is not so structured and planned. It always is very structured and planned, and this is what shows that. So I want to talk about how to use a structured approach. And the second section, I want you to think about technologies with which you are already familiar, or I will share some that you may not have come across, which you can use to supplement communication when we don't have face-to-face situations. So first of all, I wanted to share with you a structure which is very widely used in the UK for explaining any technical procedure. So this is an example of a structure we may want to adopt whenever we explain how to do something. So I'm not saying we have to all follow the Royal College of Surgeons, but they just happen to have this 5-stage model. So just let me talk you through it. I'm sure it's one you've already invented without having to have a royal charter. So stage 1, conceptualization. So you make sure that the learner is prepared and knows why they are doing this. They have the concepts in their mind to prepare them to understand and appreciate what you are going to demonstrate. The next stage is the person demonstrating silently does the procedure in real time. So you show what is being aimed for, what the expert performance of that activity is. And this allows the learner to visualize what it is they're aiming to become when they have had enough practice to become an expert. And it's very important that they see what they're aiming towards rather than see a broken down version first. So you let them see the real thing. Next, you break it down and demonstrate whilst talking about it, explaining things you want the learner to notice. And this works very well because in this stage, it's not often we watch intently and in silence. But there will be questions that will occur and people will concentrate. And this is your opportunity to talk through some of the aspects you have learned in your expertise, bits you know might be challenging or tricky to help the learner. There's an optional stage here, which I do tend to use, where I say, I will do it only if you tell me what to do. And that means that you find out in the middle of the little group of learners that they've forgotten what they're supposed to do, because the brain remembers things it sees first and last, and it gets a bit hazy in the middle. So that optional stage helps you to identify that and to put that right. The next phase, of course, is the longest one, when people practice and you give feedback on how people are doing, or they gain feedback. And they do this until they gain mastery. Maybe days, maybe years. So do you see how there's a structure? And it has been found that this enhances the ability of people to begin to gain mastery and to correctly use the skill, rather than being slightly less structured about it. So my quick question for you would be, how different is that from how you might demonstrate a skill or something which you want a rheumatologist or health professional to be able to do? So just have a think and talk to the person next to you. Do you leave behind that? Do you don't do a silent run through? Is this all completely new? Do you never do a physical procedure or talk through? But just have a chance to think and compare to the person next to you. Hello, everybody. I'm making sure we reach lunch at the right time. So you may talk further on any of these issues over lunch. Now, I hope you agree that having some sort of structure is useful when teaching and explaining. And the absolute basic structure, the storytelling structure, is, of course, to make sure that even when you are answering a question, you have a beginning, a middle, and an end. So the beginning is always to bear in mind why people need to listen or pay attention.
I don't agree with the end, because that seems, that sounds that it's a definite process, but the process is indefinite. You can learn for your whole life, though. That's maybe a weird example, but I don't think there is an end. An end may be an examination, but if we teach something, then you know it's not to an end.
Now, I think ends are really important and really interesting in communication because, like you say, life never ends. It's a series of cycles. But every time we explain or answer a question or meet to learn or meet together, it seems more and more important to me that we achieve a sense of accomplishment or completion of that part of the never-ending process. It seems important, it is artificial, but it seems important to have a sense that something has reached a kind of completion. So when you answer a question and you say, and you know, would you like me to say more? That is trying to achieve what the Americans call closure. So I only mean in that sense that it's part of a structure that a nicely finished off explanation gives the learner a sense that it's finished, it's been completed in the way that you intended, and life does go on. Xenophon wants to
I have
add.
a question to the structure. If you go back 2 slides, I think, one more. Yeah. So, you suggest to give the whole picture and then dissect it into details?
Yes, with a practical skill, obviously you can't demonstrate an entire heart transplant operation. You may well be demonstrating a section, but the visualization phase means the real-time expert production of something which may be very quick. But then, in order to slow it down and demonstrate and explain, you almost have to de-learn your expertise. So that, and that's a trap we often fall into is, yeah, I know that area really well.
I mean,
Yeah.
Is it something that is suggested, or is it, let's say, we know that this gives a better output to the learning objection? Because the way I have learned to do that, I don't say it's correct, is that you say, these are the pieces that we need as information, then we put them together. So this is a completely different approach. So you don't show the end result and you dissect it, but you go show the details, and then you put them together so people have the background to understand what the outcome is.
This is a big question in education. There is some research that some people are holists. They want to see the whole thing, and then they can take in the details. I'm like that. Some people don't believe in the big picture. They want every detail and build it up. There is some research that suggests people are in 2 camps. Usually the answer is always to give something to each. But this is the specific protocol used all over the UK. There is some evidence to say that it is a useful structure. But like most human behaviours, I don't think they've really done rigorous scientific evaluation. And besides, it would only tell you about that group of people, but perhaps we could do an experiment in the country as a whole. But thank you for thinking about that. Okay, I'm moving us on because I'm just suggesting this is a very simple structure to think about whenever you answer a question or ask a question or give an explanation. So those are just 2 examples of structures that are used when giving explanations. But as I mentioned, the key thing is always the expertise of the person giving the explanation and how they fit with the needs of the learner. So do they match? There is no point giving a fabulously detailed explanation if the person just wants to know why it's important and get a quick idea. That would be a mismatch. So again, this is part of the skill of the educator, the communicator, is to match the message with the person for whom the message is intended. And so with these learners in an online environment, we are dealing with people who are choosing what time of day, night, weekend. They are on the bus with their mobile phone. They are choosing the time. We don't get to choose that anymore. They are choosing the place. They, to some extent, are choosing how much energy they have available for this task. And usually, people are low in energy because they are doing this learning outside of the prime money-making times of their lives. So this means that we have to be even more skillful in communicating, because I know, you know, that when people are bright and lively and keen and energetic, it is much easier to teach them than when it is December the 15th, it's dark outside, it's 5 o'clock. That is very hard to teach because people are tired. In the spoken world, explanation and repetition is good. The mind likes 3s. We have lived for centuries without things being written down, without mobile phones, and we have developed brains which like things to be repeated. And 3 times is good. So do not be afraid to have some repetition in your explanations.
I miss here something. I think the learner should practice in this phase. Hands-on. I would suggest this.
Yes. Oh, I completely agree that the overall idea of education is not to do too much of the same thing for very long. So just the same, I mean, if I want to get to sleep at night, I have somebody tell me a story on a recording, because listening helps me go to sleep. So yes.
Or learning wine tasting, for example. If you never taste the wine, you know everything.
That's true. That's true. And so this is all part of your set of recipes, but I'm just trying to focus on the spoken explanation here, what you can do with just your voice and your explanation.
One mistake that I believe that we as teachers do frequently is that we assume that the learner has needs, and quite frequently you need to plant the needs into the learner's head. They haven't realized that they need information. You don't need what you don't know, right? You don't need what you don't know, just ignore it. So one nice way of doing it, I believe, is that one, we should keep that in mind, and perhaps you should start making a question on something that is relevant. Have you ever thought how you are going to resolve this? Now the question is relevant for you, and you haven't thought about the resources, and then you give the resources. So planting the need for your talk, I think, is a very important concept.
Thank you, Jose. Are you familiar with the term clickbait? I'm sorry to lower the tone, but in the online universe, clickbait is where somebody uses a compelling question or suggestion that you have a problem or a need that makes you click and go and waste time looking at something while they try and sell you something. It's the same with the headline to an article. Now, what I'm saying is, if we transfer that skill into a sedate and utterly marvellous EULAR setting, we may still need to raise the desire of somebody to be able to click and read further and pay attention. So it's all, why do they need to listen? And with one thing I've noticed in young people is that they don't feel a need to listen unless it's going to be happening in the next 6 to 8 weeks, because that's a long time. So that's why this will be in the exam, is always a very compelling need to listen, because the exam is coming and they know that's real. This will make you a great human being is much further in the future and much harder to make them want to listen. So I'm going to show you an example of a narrated PowerPoint which I created for this medical humanities course. But before I do that, I just want to invite you to think for a moment. I'm trying to give you a reason to listen. Think of something, an explanation, which you may need to give again and again, or which is important to your course. It could be demonstrating a practical skill on a video. It could be explaining why something is important, or emphasising something that is a red flag, or whatever it is. Is there something that you think would benefit? You find yourself explaining to trainees, for example. Could we find a way of recording that and incorporating it into our online course universe? Or are there key questions or things which you could encourage the learner to reflect upon, which would substitute for you being there as a wise, experienced person actually asking them? So I'm now going to set up, and hope that it will work, a PowerPoint presentation. And what I did was create something called a Pecha Kucha. Hands up, anybody who's ever heard of Pecha Kucha. It's Japanese, I think, isn't it? It's reached schools already. The idea was people wouldn't stop talking, and so death by PowerPoint was occurring. And so what groups agreed, you would have 20 seconds. Oh look, I'm starting to talk. I'm in 2 places at once. You have 20 seconds and the slide moves on. You have 20 images or slides to use. It keeps going in spite of you. So in my room at work, I wanted to introduce students I'd not met, to prepare them to think about the medical humanities. So everything medical except actual clinical drugs and techniques. So I think rheumatologists will agree that's actually a huge amount of medicine. and what you do is actually not about the injection and the drug. It's about the whole person and all the things that are to do with being human. So I'm going to play you this Pecha Kucha now. So I picked 20 key advances over the last 2,000 years, and I recorded, I practiced a bit, but I just used PowerPoint narrate function, which you've all got, but you've probably not looked at, I know I hadn't, to record this talk. So have a listen to this. So I think we can start.
Hello.
Can we turn the lights down
This is
a bit?
a Pecha Kucha presentation. In other words, a maximum per slide of 20 seconds and 20 slides in all. And the topic, medical advances over the millennia. I've selected over history some standout points for me, and here's the first. 1800 BC, we have the Code of Hammurabi, which apparently the carvings on this stone describe fees for surgeons and punishments for malpractice. Some things start early. Jumping forward, we're still 420 BC, and we have Hippocrates, he of the Hippocratic Oath, and on the right here is a 12th century copy of the Hippocratic Oath. So again, focusing on the how to practice medicine rather than what exactly to do. We've passed the millennium, we're now in 129 to 216 AD, and we meet Galen, or Galenus. A clinical medicine is based on observation and experience, and his contribution was to govern events for a long time. We've jumped forward, in fact, we've come through the Dark Ages, and we're now at a particular high point, 1350, and here in a rather jocular way we have the Black Death on its European tour, 1347 to 1351, in which the Black Death or bubonic plague visited all of these areas of Europe: Crimea, Rhine, Calais, Dorset, Bristol, London, Yorkshire, Milan, Flanders, Tuscany, and so on, and was responsible for wiping out virtually 1/3 of the population. We jump forward again to the 1500s, and here we have the Gentile College of Physicians, who awarded themselves or received their royal charter in 1518, and here they are in one of their glamorous assembly rooms slightly later than that. 1543, Andreas Vesalius publishes his De Fabrica Corporis Humani, which corrects various Greek medical errors which have pertained for a long time, and actually revolutionises European medicine. And here on the right is a pose illustrating anatomy in a way that you may not be familiar with. Again, in the century from 1550 to 1650, we have the uncovering of various mysteries of the circulatory system. 1553, Miguel Serveto describes the circulation of the blood through the lungs. He is unfortunately accused of heresy and burnt at the stake. And in 1628, an Englishman, William Harvey, explains circulation and so becomes famous in England. Another 150 years of difficulty. 1665, we have the height of the Great Plague, particularly in London, wiped clean by the Great Fire of London. And here on the left is an illustration of an outfit which was worn by doctors of the time, essentially the first biohazard suits. A busy time then, 1701, Pilarini picked up the smallpox vaccination idea, which was prevalent in the East already. 1790, Hahnemann railed against bloodletting, but instead found homeopathy, which at least was doing no harm. 1796, Jenner picks up the smallpox idea and develops the smallpox vaccination, the forerunner of many subsequent treatments. Things are speeding up now, 1800 to 1827, and we have three key cornerstones of medical practice. First of all, 1816, Lenach invents the stethoscope. There it is on the right, the little humble wooden tube that allows you to hear things without getting fleas hopping on you from your patients. And then in 1818, James Blundell invents the human blood transfusion, and there's a modern version of that. And in 1827, Joseph Lister first institutes antiseptic surgery, thus beginning to transform what the medical practitioner can attempt. 1825 to 1850, and we have leaps forward in terms of anaesthesia. So in 1842, Crawford Long, seen here on a United States postage stamp, was responsible for instituting the first surgical anaesthesia using ether. to be followed by 1846 with the first painless surgery using general anaesthetic. 1850 to 1875, an exciting time, and here in 1870, Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch established the germ theory of disease. And here we have, through a microscope, a very fine example of the cholera bacilli. Picking up pace again, 1875 to 1900, 1895, we have Wilhelm Röntgen's medical use of X-rays, and here some early use of that with absolutely no health and safety facilities whatsoever, as they didn't quite realise some of the other implications of X-rays. 1900 to 1925, a very busy quarter of a century. In 1901, Karl Landsteiner identifies different blood types. In 1901, Alois Alzheimer names his first case. 1903, William Einthoven discovers the ECG. 1906, Frederick Hopkins identifies vitamins, and in 1921, Banting and Best discover insulin. Another busy quarter of a century, 1925 to 1950. So in 1923 to 1928, we have the first vaccines for these widespread diseases: diphtheria, pertussis, tuberculosis and tetanus, which have a huge impact on public health. In 1928, Alexander Fleming discovers penicillin, which, as we know, gets picked up and used, particularly through World War II, to become the widespread impact on the health of the nation. And in 1946, Gilman and Goodman invent chemotherapy. So here in a slide all on its own in the 1950s, dedicated to polio, and Jonas Salk in 1952, who identified the first polio vaccine, which was made available from 1955. And on the right you can see the iconic and chilling iron lung, which was required to keep patients breathing for the indeterminate length of time which polio paralysed their breathing for. It was not known whether people would be able to emerge from these iron lungs or not. And enormous fundraising was done in the States based on chilling pictures of room after room after room full of people smitten suddenly with polio being breathed for by these machines. Here, one of the most crucial slides of all, the 1960s, early 1960s, in fact just 1960 to 1962, we have some enormous leaps forward. 1960, the invention of CPR. Seems to me quite astonishing that it was not until that time that CPR method was established. It's been changed subsequently, but there you are, 1960. Also, the first combined oral contraceptive approved by the Food and Drugs Administration. 1962, hip replacement brought in by John Charnley, and by James Black, the first beta blocker. Again in the 60s, mid-60s, and here we have the first commercial ultrasound on the left, now very familiar image to us, and then at the time extremely exciting. And on the right, to commemorate Christian Barnard's first human heart transplant, we have a heart undergoing open heart surgery. The final quarter of the last century starts to change a little and things slow down. And here we have in the 1980s, though, Raymond Damadian's first commercial MRI scanner, which again revealed things, allowed us to see soft tissue. Bringing us up to date, really, to the year 2000. 26th of June 2000, the human genome was finally drafted, and here's the bookshelf in the Wellcome Institute in which the human genome is printed out. And now I'd like you to think about and post something on the student forum in answer to the following question. If you'd been practicing medicine, let's say in the 1700s, what exactly would you have been doing? How would you have been able to practice medicine with virtually none of the technological treatments and skills that we now have available? And I'd like you to then respond to other people's posts and consider any emerging themes and their relationship to what we may now consider to be the medical humanities. In other words, everything pertaining to the nature of the human condition, which is not a technological treatment. Bit weird hearing myself do that talk there, but
I so enjoyed putting that together because I found it very interesting. And I hope you agree that using a structure of changing every 20 seconds, having a certain number of slides, it keeps things moving, it allows you to keep energy in your voice and record things and makes it perhaps easier to watch, but establishes quite an intimate connection with the listener because they feel they know you, because they are hearing your voice. So that's just one thing I wanted to illustrate. We are up against lunch here. I had one more thing to demonstrate, which was recording for something I called medheads, okay, where I got lots of experts to sit in a studio at the University of Nottingham and I interviewed them and I made clips of what their wisdom was so that learners could go and click to get a bit of medical expertise on a number of different topics. I forgot to include myself, and then I realised that I could talk about things based on my research and years of being a facilitator with learners in groups and chairing meetings and so on. So I have a short clip where I am talking about some of the advanced skills of being a facilitator. Now, I don't know if I can set this up. Can I set it up so that they don't see it, but they can hear it? And then switch the picture on, because one thing I think puts us off is having to be filmed. And honestly, I look at it and think, what? Oh dear. But it, you know, it works either way, but this might be slightly advanced, I don't know. Oh look, I'll take the risk.
Which one is the video file for that?
Okay, it is that one, CHYH. Okay, just
Something
run it
else
as
that
it
often
is then,
emerges
just
from
make
that
it.
would be that there may be particular voluble or favourite contributors in any discussion or debate. Quite often the person to the right of the tutor gets more opportunity to attract attention and participate in discussion, and so one can end up unintentionally having more discussion from people on your right. Also, people who like to take part in discussions will probably choose to sit in those places where they know they can catch your eye, so directly in front of you and to your right, which means that the people who may need some encouragement and gentle help in participating in the discussion may sit to your left. Something else that often emerges from that would be that there may be particular voluble or favourite contributors in any discussion or debate. Quite often the person to the right of the tutor gets more opportunity to attract attention and participate in discussion, and so one can end up unintentionally having more discussion from people on your right. Also, people who like to take part in discussions will probably choose to sit in those places where they know they can catch your eye, so directly in front of you and to your right, which means that the people who may need some encouragement and gentle help in participating in the discussion may sit to your left. This is a left, you know, right-handed universe. They may well sit to your left, and you may need to consciously invite them in and use a mechanism such as everybody taking a turn and so on to make sure that they contribute. If you have people in your group that are very strongly choosing to remain silent, it may be useful to give them a starter role, a role which doesn't require them to voice their own particular opinions yet, but that very much to contribute and start building their confidence at holding the floor and speaking in a room full of others. So you may ask them to read out questions, for example, or take a subsidiary role. One thing I saw recently that worked very well was a tutor who just invited particular students to read parts of a slide in a PowerPoint show rather than him doing that. And so this sharing the work, sharing the role with the learners gives them a leg up, gives them a possibility to join in the discussion.
So there's some bonus materials there for you also, but I'm bringing it to a close now. I've wanted to identify and apply a structured approach to giving spoken explanations here. I wanted you to illustrate using technology that you are already familiar with, On the slides, there are some suggestions. Everybody with a smartphone has got the ability to record themselves speaking. So, you know, you can write a script, you can practice, you can email that explanation to yourself or a colleague. You can start practicing these skills really quite soon. And so the main thing I just wanted to end with as your question for over lunch, I'll just show you some of those things. You could write a script, try it out. You could look for some further details about a good microphone if you have £60 to spare to get a digital thing. This is if you're in the Apple universe. This is if you're in the Android universe. This is the slide showing on PowerPoint where you can go to look for recording a PowerPoint narration. What I want you to think about over lunch is what is the scope for applying this sort of technology that is within all of our reach in your teaching online with EULAR. So getting ready for the opportunities we are going to have in the future. And so over lunchtime, have a thought, ask questions, think about it, and most of all, enjoy lunch. Have a full 55 minutes of lunch, and then after lunch, you have a further quick half an hour with your groups just to decide what you want to share with everybody about what you have learned about developing your online courses, what you plan to do, what you think might be useful to others, what you need from EULAR to help you do this better. And then the very last session will be for us to take it in turns to come up and hear from a spokesperson from each group and then evaluate what we found useful in the event, what you'd like in future, and then we've completed things.